The Blood of Dignity, the forgotten story of India's breast tax. Opening scene. Sound of wind over palm trees, faint temple bells, footsteps on soil. Narrator. In the lush green land of Kerala, centuries ago, there lived a woman whose courage would change the course of history. Her name was Nangeli, a woman who defied a kingdom, a caste system, and an age-old law that taxed not her wealth, but her dignity. This is the story of the breast tax, a chapter buried beneath India's silence, a tale of oppression, courage, and an act of defiance so powerful it shook an empire.
1. Travancore, the Kingdom of Paradoxes. The 18th and 19th centuries, the princely state of Travancore stood as one of the richest regions in southern India. Coconut palms lined its coast, spice-laden ships left its ports for Arabia and Europe. The land was ruled by kings who claimed divine descent, protectors of temples and patrons of art. But beneath that serene beauty lay a rigid, suffocating social order. Travancore society was ruled by the iron hierarchy of caste, an ancient structure that dictated how people lived, what they wore, where they walked, and even how they breathed. At the top stood the Nambudri Brahmins and Nair aristocrats, the priestly and warrior castes. Below them, the Ezavas, Nadars, Pulayas and others, the working classes who toiled in fields, tapped toddy and served the upper castes. It was not just a system of inequality, it was a theology of humiliation. Every action, every symbol of dignity was marked by caste. A person's clothes, ornaments, even the distance they had to keep from an upper caste person were all strictly prescribed.
2. The law of the uncovered body. In this world, clothing was not a matter of modesty. It was a privilege. Upper caste women, especially Nairs and Brahmins, wore garments covering both shoulders and breasts. But women of the lower castes were forbidden from doing the same in the presence of upper caste men. They had to keep their chests bare, as a public sign of subservience. Covering one's breast was seen as an act of rebellion, an attempt to claim equality. This humiliation was institutionalized in the form of taxes. There were dozens of poll taxes. Taxes on men, elakaram, meaning head tax, and on women, mulakaram, meaning breast tax. The breast
3. Colonial shadows and missionary winds. Fade in sound of waves and a ship's bell. British traders arriving. By the early 1800s, British colonial power had reached Travancore. Christian missionaries, especially from the London Missionary Society, began setting up schools and churches in the region. For the first time, lower caste people gained access to education, and conversion gave them new rights, at least under church protection. Women, especially from the Nadar and Ajava communities, began adopting upper cloths as a mark of modesty, just like European women and upper caste Hindu women did. But to the feudal elite of Travancore, this was unacceptable. They saw it as an attack on caste purity, a direct challenge to the sacred social order. Thus began a long and bitter conflict known as the Upper Cloth Revolt.
4. The Fire of Rebellion. Between 1822 and 1859, the Nadar women of southern Travancore fought a battle that had no swords, no armies, only cloth and courage. They were attacked, stripped, and humiliated for wearing upper garments. Houses were burned and women who resisted were beaten. Missionaries protested, the British administrators hesitated, and the Travancore court defended tradition, saying each caste shall wear what is fitting to its station.
The fight for the right to wear a blouse became a symbol of human dignity itself. And in the midst of this storm, one woman's defiance would immortalize the struggle. 5. The story of Nangeli. Music fades to soft strings, a somber, intimate tone. In the early years of the 19th century, in the small village of Cherthala, lived a woman named Nangeli. She belonged to the Ejfa community, toddy tappers by caste, one of the many groups forced to pay the Mullah Karam. The story passed down through oral history tells us that one morning, a tax collector came to her house. He demanded the usual tribute, the breast tax, for daring to cover herself. Nangeli refused. She had seen enough of humiliation, enough of this moral slavery disguised as law. With quiet determination, she went inside her hut, took a sharp knife, and returned with her decision carved into her flesh. She cut off both her breasts, placed them on a banana leaf, and laid them before the tax collector. Then she collapsed and bled to death. When her husband, Chidu Kondin, saw her lifeless body, he was consumed by grief. He built a funeral pyre and threw himself into the flames, an act of male sati, unheard of in history. The news of this horror spread like wildfire across the land. The people of Travancore, shocked by the extremity of her sacrifice, rose in protest. And soon after, the system of Mullah Karam, the breast tax, was abolished. The place where she lived came to be known as Mulachi Parambu, the land of the breasted woman. Even today, in Cherthala, that name endures. 6. History or legend? Historians debate whether the story of Nangeli is literal or symbolic. Archival records confirm that poll taxes like Thalakaram and Mulakaram existed, but there is no written colonial record explicitly describing a breast tax paid according to a woman's body. Some scholars argue that Mulakaram simply meant tax on women, that the word breasts was a linguistic coincidence, not a physical measure. Yet oral histories across Kerala, told by the Arava and other communities, maintain that the humiliation was real. Lower caste women were beaten, fined, or even killed for wearing uppercloths. So whether Nangeli's act was historical or allegorical, her symbolism is undeniable. She became the face of a deeper truth, that for centuries, caste depression in India reached into the very skin of the body, dictating who could stand tall, who could speak, who could cover themselves.
7. The abolition of the upper cloth ban. Scene: British administrator reading orders, pen scratching on paper. After decades of turmoil, the struggle of lower caste women reached its climax. Missionaries lobbied the British government, arguing that the Travancore state's laws violated human decency. Finally, in 1859, under pressure from both reformers and colonial officials, the Travancore king issued an order. Women of all castes were allowed to cover their upper bodies in a manner consistent with their status. The phrase still carried caste undertones, but in practice, it marked the end of a centuries-old tyranny. The women who once risked their lives for a piece of cloth could now stand with dignity.
8. Colonialism, caste and control. But freedom came with contradictions. British officials celebrated this as a victory of civilization, but they too used it to justify their colonial dominance, portraying Indian society as backward and themselves as saviors. In truth, the real struggle was not between East and West. It was between power and dignity, between those who ruled and those who refused to kneel. The caste system in Travancore was a machinery of control, but it was also fragile, threatened by education, conversion, and defiance. Women like Nangeli
poor, illiterate, invisible, struck at its core.
9. The memory of resistance. Soft music, image of backwaters. Temple bells, modern city sounds fade in. Today, the story of Nangeli lives on in whispers and songs. In Charthala, people still point to the spot called Mulachiparambu. Local ballads speak of her courage. Artists paint her, poets write of her, filmmakers rediscover her. In her story, India finds an echo of countless nameless women who fought not on battlefields but in the quiet corners of their own homes. Their resistance was not written in ink, it was written in blood, cloth, and silence.
Nangeli's defiance is not just a tale of one woman's protest. It is a mirror to India's own journey. In her act, we see the intersection of caste, gender, and class. Her refusal was a rejection of a system that commodified a woman's body and sanctified inequality. Today, when we speak of feminism, bodily autonomy, or social justice, her story reminds us that these are not modern imports, but battles fought long ago in the heart of our own soil. Her protest was not shouted from rooftops, it was whispered in pain, in dignity, and in death.
11. The legacy of the Ijava and Nadar reforms. After the abolition of such taxes, the Ijava and Nadar communities emerged as some of the most progressive reform groups in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Under leaders like Shri Narayan Guru, the Ijavas fought for equality through education and self-respect. The Nadars in Tamil Nadu built schools, churches, and businesses, becoming a powerful community in modern South India. Their transformations were rooted in the struggles of women who had once been forbidden even to wear clothes freely. The breast tax era thus became a catalyst for social awakening.
12. Truth beyond myth. Modern historians continue to debate the literal truth of the breast tax. Some argue that British missionaries exaggerated such stories to paint Indian society as barbaric. Others say that oral histories captured truths that archives never will. But perhaps the question is not whether every detail is factual. Perhaps the question is why such a story persists, generation after generation. Because it speaks to something timeless, the human demand for dignity.
13. The land remembers. Walk today through the lanes of Charthala, and you may hear an elder point to a small patch of land and say, "This is Mulachiparambu, where a woman gave her breasts for justice." There is no grand monument, no marble statue, only the memory of courage carved into the conscience of a people. Nangeli's name is rarely found in school books, but among those who know, she is remembered not as a victim, but as a revolutionary, a martyr of modesty, a woman who told an empire that her body was her own.
14. Apologue, a legacy etched in silence. In a world still battling for women's rights and social equality, the echoes of Mulakaram remind us that freedom is never granted, it is taken, often at great cost. The story of the breast tax is not just about history, it's about ownership. Who owns your body, your choice, your dignity? For the women of Travancore, the answer came not from law or religion, but from resistance. And among them, one woman stood tallest, not because she lived long, but because she refused to live bowed.